And our topic of discussion tonight is ending period poverty in Kenya. Research shows that over 65% of women and girls in Kenya do not have access to feminine hygiene products. Speaking to us tonight is Senator Gloria Orwoba. She is behind a motion pushing for an increase in government funding for free sanitary pads and provision of female hygiene products in all public schools. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me here.
Now, Senator, I'd like to begin by quoting the Kenya Kwanza manifesto, and it reads in part of it, that provide free sanitary towels in all schools and public washrooms easily accessible to economically disadvantaged women. 6 months since the Kenya Kwanza team took office, where are we? Has this been actualized? You're a Kenya Kwanza senator. Where are we on this?
So as far as distribution of free sanitary towels to schools, I know that there is some level of activity from the Ministry, actually, of Education. And together with the Ministry of Gender, Waziri Aisha Jumwa is actually working on a formula to see how we can deal with this particular issue. But what I'm trying to solve, based on how I was thrown into this whole situation, is that I'm trying to push that we legislate it. Currently, there is sort of one paragraph that was slid into the Education Act to say that the Ministry of Education will provide. It does not give the frequency, how many times they will provide. It doesn't give the framework of which schools are getting. So currently, it's not all schools that get the free sanitary towels. There's a lot of issues that need to be dealt with in terms of regulations and legal work on, for instance, procurement, how to push that we are actually allowing for the local manufacturers to, be part of this solution, because it's an end-to-end. We are dealing with period poverty. Period poverty means people can't afford to go and buy sanitary towels. But if you take away the jobs by actually importing the same sanitary towels and killing the local industry, it's also one way of ensuring that the poverty continues, and then you have one problem. So I have a bill that we already started drafting from last session, intends to have a standing act on provision of sanitary towels to all school-going children. That means all primary schools, all secondary schools that are government, and also to prisons, because there's a big problem in prisons as well in terms of provision of sanitary towels. In prisons, it's as bad as the women actually share pads. And if you're listening to this, sharing a pad means that I'm not on my heavy flow, so I put on the pad. And then because it's not completely soaked up, I pass it over to another woman. And we can't have that.
Yeah, and one problematic assumption around, period poverty is that provision of sanitary towels is concentrated around girls in schools. And I like that you've raised the issue of women in prisons. What about women across the country, the disadvantaged ones that have no access to...
The ideal solution, Lillian, would be that sanitary towels are free for everyone, including you sitting here in studio, to an extent that it becomes a commodity like you have tissue paper. That's the ideal, in the ideal world. But then, this problem, we can't solve it like coming from 0 to 100%, solution. So right now, the most vulnerable are the school-going children, because what's happening? They are now resorting into getting into commercial sex work just to get that money to be able to buy the sanitary towels. So we need to start from somewhere. And I'm saying, as the plight is real, we're talking about teenage pregnancies, you're talking about HIV prevalence, you're talking about a domino effect of even the schoolgirls completely leaving school. We have parents who think, okay, Sasa, you've reached an age where you've started your periods, so probably I need to marry you off, so that becomes someone else's problem. So there's a whole domino effect around school-going children, and I feel right now that is the most vulnerable point to start with, and then slowly ensure that it's not only prisons, but also the vulnerable who can't access it within our community.
I'm looking back at previous attempts, because this is a conversation that has been had successively over the years, looking at previous attempts and looking at the reduction, say, of tampon tax. What are the budgets looking like as of now, if this was ever to be a reality?
So the one step that at least we took in the right direction is we took out the taxes on pads in terms of the consumed product. But what we did not do is, you still have the local manufacturers importing the material that is being used to manufacture the pads. That material is taxed. So in the end, it doesn't offer them a competitive edge as opposed to like now if I just import pads from China, for instance. So we also need to look at the angle of manufacturing, because manufacturing is a solution to end the poverty in itself. If you go to Mlolongo, and I've said this repeatedly, there are some companies there that produce sanitary towels. The time when they get they call it the MOE, Ministry of Education tender, people actually come queuing up to 2,000 casual laborers. And that's a whole cycle of first dealing with the poverty, because period poverty starts with the fact that these people cannot be able to afford. So I would say the policy around the taxation on issues that deal with the sanitary towels should really be looked at. It's not just the complete, like, okay, so you can import pads and you don't get. They need to look at it holistically. And then the framework of procurement in terms of how we are providing this free tanning. We don't want this to end up as another KEMSA scandal. So we need to look into it. Even if we are following AGPO and we're ensuring that the women and youth are actually accessing those tenders for sanitary towels, they can't just be companies that are set up to bring in pads from China. Right. Let them also push the local manufacturers so that we can actually have an end-to-end solution in terms of poverty in itself.
Many thanks for that, Senator Gloria Orwoba, and indeed for your role as a senator and the kind of legislation you're putting forward as we strive to end period poverty in the country. Please send in your comments around